To the Point with Michael Williams.
I've spent a lot of time since the shooting in Marjory Stoneman Douglas with the students who survived. And they've been very clear that what they want is action. And I am heartened by what you say about the need for presidential leadership. You can do this.
That was local Democratic Congressman Ted Deutch a little more than a week ago in a meeting with President Trump, talking about guns and gun legislation and potential restrictions. Are they any closer today to changing laws, and what are the obstacles? Good morning and welcome. My guest today is our local Democratic Congressman Ted Deutch, who told the president, as you heard, that he can do this. Congressman Deutch, a Democrat from Boca Raton. His district includes Parkland, where 17 people were killed at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School on Valentine's Day. Thank you for coming in, sir.
It's good to be with you. Thanks.
I know you've worked tirelessly and nonstop on this issue and will continue to do so. First, talk about that meeting a week ago, and yet 2 days later, when they thought, or when you all thought there might be some traction with President Trump on issues and gun restrictions, a meeting with the NRA where he seemed to back away. Where does it stand now? Your take.
Well, I can't tell you where it stands with the president, but I'm quite certain where it stands in our community and frankly, where it stands in our country. And that is the overwhelming desire to see Congress take meaningful steps to reduce gun violence. I don't know what the president's going to do, but I'm less concerned about his meeting with the NRA, frankly, than I've ever been in the past. The president sat at that meeting, looked at my Republican colleagues and told them not to be afraid of the NRA. I don't know that the president is committed to doing what he said needs to be done. Universal background checks, raising the age to 21 to buy a gun, banning bump stocks, among others. I don't know how committed he is, but he said the right things, and the pressure from around the country, led by these incredibly inspirational and powerful students, are going to ensure, that pressure will ensure that he's forced to confront inaction as long as there is nothing done. So I can only work with and help amplify the voices of these students and push my colleagues as hard as I can to move forward with legislation that has this overwhelming support, not just of the American people as a whole in a bipartisan way, but NRA members as well, all of whom know that we have to take action. We need universal background checks. We need to rid our communities of weapons of war and ban high-capacity magazines. These are no longer controversial propositions. We just need my colleagues in Congress to understand they have to start listening to the people.
But with Republican majorities on the Hill in both the House and Senate, the likelihood of a ban on magazines and certainly an assault weapons ban seems to be something that is still out of reach.
We want to accomplish whatever we can now, and that means universal background checks, which is supported by nearly everyone in this country, banning bump stocks, which only makes sense. The common sense.
And by the way, bump stocks, for those of you who may be unfamiliar, that essentially can turn a semi into an automatic type fire weapon.
A machine gun, right. Sure. So those are steps that we can take right now.
Are the votes there?
If we were allowed to vote on these, if the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader put these on the floor for a vote, and the President actually followed through on the things that he said at that White House meeting, then I'm confident that there would be the votes.
But therein lies the rub. The big if is whether House Speaker Ryan and Mitch McConnell in the Senate would allow that to happen. And right now, the political atmosphere, at least at that end of the equation, does not seem to be there.
Well, if by the political atmosphere you're referring to what the NRA tells them to do, then I would agree with you. If you're speaking more broadly about the political atmosphere in America that says there is no reason that we should be listening to the leaders of an organization that are funded millions of dollars a year by the gun companies whose sole interest is increasing their profits, putting at risk the lives of kids in our schools, if that's the sole focus and where the politics are for the Speaker and the Majority Leader, then you're right, it's hard for them. But at some point, they're going to have to make a determination whether they're going to continue to be owned by the gun companies or whether they're going to do the right thing and stand up for the safety of our kids. I just have to tell you, the number of people who have come up to me these past few weeks, Democrats and Republicans alike, who have said, you know, I want you to understand, at this point, I am a single issue voter. I will only vote for those people, those elected officials, candidates, who will work to make my kids safe. That's how things are now changing.
That actually was going to be my next question. You see this as a definitive ballot box difference maker this fall in midterms. This is where people will say and see, and we'll find out whether this is a litmus test issue.
Yeah, led, first
one
of all,
way or the other.
First of all, led by these students who are now turning 18.
And you've talked about how eloquent they've been, and you've met with families even recently before you came to be with us today. Talk about that and how you think that'll drive what happens in November, potentially.
Well, I've been at a number of meetings that these students have had. We had 8 Stoneman Douglas students come up to Washington, and we arranged meetings. We met with dozens of members of the House and Senate, and they are passionate, and they are eloquent. When they are lectured to about the Second Amendment, they reach into their own pockets and pull out their own copy of the Second Amendment to point out the flaws and the logic of their elected officials. They're really good, and they're talented. They know how social media works. They know that people are on their side, and they know that we cannot allow the traditional way that these issues are addressed. That is a lot of shock and sadness, followed by some anger, followed by nothing. We can't allow that to happen again. I
want to turn to legislation that you've helped sponsor that will come up on the Hill next week. Before I do, for those of you watching, and there will be many who will say, wait a minute, this sounds like a typical response from a Democrat who wants to take our guns away. We hear that. I see it on social media. Now, what do you say to that argument?
I say that that when the leadership of the NRA says that people want to take their guns away, when they say that they're the only thing standing between where we are now and tyranny, when they say that really this is an effort to take away everyone's individual rights.
All of which we've heard in the last few weeks.
All of which we've heard as a diversion. People know that that's nonsense. We heard that for 8 years during the Obama administration. We're now hearing it after President Trump said that he's serious about doing something. It's a diversion. The fact that they're saying that doesn't mean that anyone needs to believe it. When your sole focus is standing up for the profits of the gun companies, then you say things to divert attention from the fact that the overwhelming majority of NRA members, virtually more than 2/3, frankly, have said that we have to have universal background checks.
We hear
that
a lot.
It's not controversial.
We hear that a lot. Where's that polling?
There was a Monmouth poll that came out just a day or so ago.
Okay.
So this isn't, look, the battle, the fact is the majority of Americans now agree with me that weapons of war, that military-style assault rifles should not be on our streets.
And across the aisle, your Republican colleague Brian Mast, combat veteran himself, has come around to that view.
Correct, right. There's a growing consensus around that, but even as we have that debate, let's do the things where there is no controversy at all.
That leads us to legislation on school safety that you're co-sponsoring on into next week. Lay out for our viewers what it includes.
Sure. So we had actually just a week or so before the shooting, we had a roundtable discussion down in Broward County with local officials and the superintendent and some representatives from Sandy Hook Promise, about legislation that we introduced called the Stop School Violence Act that would create action teams, funding for action teams to go into schools to work with law enforcement and school officials and students and parents to help identify potential threats, people that might put others at risk, so that steps can be taken to keep our schools safe. This is a very small step, but it will be a step forward if we can move on this and pass it. It's bipartisan. We've got Democrats and Republicans from all around the country who are supportive of it. We need to move on this, and then we need to keep moving forward in all of the other ways that we can take action to keep kids safe.
And a lot of this mirrors what Florida lawmakers have been pushing already, poised to push for and poised to sign into law. We expect that's going to happen on raising the age to buy guns 18 to 21, banning bump stocks, expanding at least background checks. So a lot of states are at least looking at companion legislation. We'll see where all of that goes. Anything else in the bill that people should be particularly mindful of as it goes to the Hill for debate next week?
Well, what's most important is that this is a piece of legislation that addresses the threat of gun violence in schools. And the fact that we're even having this debate is a step forward. But as I told the Speaker of the House on the floor just a couple of days ago, he shouldn't believe that this is where it's going to end, that they can claim victory for having done something. This is just a very small first step. Important, but just a first step.
Nothing in that bill right now involving firearms. We've had that discussion yet, but your argument that's to come. And a lot of people in this country saying we need to spend a lot more effort and time on mental health. Not only identification, but also treatment as well.
Yeah, and I assume the governor is going to sign this, this piece of legislation that passed that has really important things in it, that stands up and defies the NRA for the first time that any of us can remember in Tallahassee, which is an incredible step forward. But mental health is really important. And the fact that the governor who's going to sign this bill has for years refused to expand Medicaid, which would provide access to mental health care for hundreds of thousands of Floridians across our state. If we're going to be serious about addressing mental health care, we have to give people access to it. And sadly, he's continued to refuse to take the steps that would permit that.
Congressman, since we have you here, I do want to turn very briefly in our remaining time to two other topics. One, your sense of confidence or lack therein about possible Russian involvement in the upcoming election. We've heard all of the reports, the indictments from the special counsel about their efforts to influence the 2016 campaign. Your concerns about 2018?
I'm very concerned. The facts are clear that Russia interfered in our last election. Since that interference in the election, Congress has passed tough sanctions in response. The president has refused, to date, to impose those sanctions on Russia.
Why do you think?
I don't know. I can speculate.
Speculate.
I think a lot of us are speculating. Well, what it shows is the importance of letting the Mueller investigation run its course. We need to find out exactly what happened, exactly what connections, to the extent there are any, that existed at the time. We don't know that. But we have to do that at the same time that we're focused on the midterm elections. The Attorney General of the United States came to our Judiciary Committee and acknowledged that they hadn't taken the necessary steps to protect our elections. Our democracy is what we need to protect, and the administration has not done enough to do it. Fortunately, local leaders around our state, in our county, and around the country have stepped up to do their part, but we need to see more coming from Washington, coming from the White House.
Do you believe our democracy is at risk from this kind of interference? Fundamental risk?
I believe that anytime there is the risk of a foreign power interfering in our election, when we saw the impact of that interference in the last election, of course that's a threat to our democracy. There's nothing Vladimir Putin would like better than to sow discord and cause people to start to question our own democracy. He won't win on that. People have faith in our democracy. We also have to have faith in the institutions to help ensure that it is sound.
Congressman Deutch, I know you've been on a whirlwind and will continue to be as you focus on the issues after Parkland, continue to meet with families. We have a huge march coming up later in the month where you'll meet with them again. We thank you for your time. We'll be keeping up with what you're doing on the Hill, and as always, welcome you when you come back by for your next visit on To the Point.
Appreciate it. Good to be with you.
Thank you, sir, as always. Coming up, our roundtable takes on the politics of gun legislation and more. Stay with us.